Oh well, here we go. Dragon Age Inquisition is an RPG made by Bioware where you play as the Inquisitor, the leader of a multinational organization whose members include a merry band of goofballs that are trying to save the world of Thedas from a giant green hole in the sky called the Breach, which is letting demons loose everywhere, and if it gets any bigger will probably destroy the world. Also, you need to sort out some other minor world problems like a major rebellion that might change the foundations of this world's society. Oh, and a civil war threatening to throw half Thedas into chaos. So you know, small stuff. This game follows on the story from Dragon Age Origins, which had its own world-ending event involving a Grey Warden stopping a blight and slaying an archdemon, with some other story stuff that you get to see the result of in this game. And Dragon Age 2, which had a much smaller story involving a very few unstable characters who caused huge problems between mages and Templars, which helped kick off the Mage Rebellion that Hawk, the protagonist of that game, wasn't able to stop. So you're gonna have to deal with that problem now. Thanks, Hawk.
Always a pleasure.
Dragon Age 2 to me did set up the events in Dragon Age Inquisition really well, and a good story involving some great companions, though it wasn't what fans who were looking for an epic fantasy RPG were expecting. So coming off the feedback from Dragon Age 2 and Mass Effect 3, Bioware felt the need to go big to win back fans. Also, EA's history with studios not performing well maybe gave some extra motivation. There were a few problems however. The Eclipse game engine they'd used for previous Dragon Age games wasn't going to cut it, especially if they wanted to make a big, pretty open world game, like the rest of the gaming industry was scrambling to make at the time after the release of games like Skyrim and Far Cry 3. Now they could have gone with a game engine like Unreal, which worked out pretty well for Mass Effect, as it had a lot of the tools they needed to make the game and they had a lot of experience working with it. Also, it was fairly well supported, but EA wanted to save money on licensing expenses for using someone else's engine, whispered into Bioware's ear the name Frostbite, which to be fair at the time didn't have the reputation it has now of being difficult to work with, and it did look pretty.
See how I do it.
Also, Bioware probably didn't really have a choice of any other game engine thanks to those in charge at EA. This forced Bioware to go for looks over substance and started working with Frostbite. Now while it was pretty, it was missing like 90% of what they needed to make the game, since it was made for first-person shooters and not RPGs. It didn't have a dialogue system, stats, items, character classes, and even the ability to save games, but at least it's a nice looking engine.
See how I do it.
So how did Bioware overcome these lack of features? Yeah, you guessed it, Bioware magic. Though this game would be the last time the soul-devouring magic trick worked, as the two games that came after this one is where the illusion really fell apart. And it only barely worked in this game, as most of the development time was just spent making the tools in Frostbite to run an RPG game. Now don't get me wrong, I don't think Frostbite is an inherently terrible engine. As it can work in some cases, I just get the sense from what I've seen over the years that it's just not supported well enough for it to work for every type of game. Like even DICE, who made the game engine, have had issues making it work for their games, which says a lot. And I'm not an expert on game engines, but my point is, shouldn't the engine and tools you choose to make the game on above all else make it easier to create, not harder? Anyway, the troubles with Frostbite result in Bioware not having enough time to make a lot of interesting side quests for the open world sections of the game, and instead had to rely on the overuse of the unholy trinity of open world games: simple fetch quests, collectathons, and puzzles. Not only that, but EA got worried that the newer consoles at the time, being the PS4 and Xbox One, were not going to sell well. So EA ordered Bioware to release the game on PS3 and Xbox 360 in addition to the newer consoles and PC. And to make the game work on all these platforms while still struggling with Frostbite, Bioware had to ditch some of the features that would have worked on the newer hardware. You can get a glimpse of what these features might have been like if you check the PAX Prime 2013 demo of the game, which when I first saw way back when, thought looked pretty cool. Though I never really understood why people cheered for this one part where the Inquisitor struggles to walk in mud. Why? Anyway, Bioware needed more time to finish off the game, so they asked for an extension from EA.
So, yeah, what do you want? An extension?
Which was granted on the condition that they include more features into the game. This led to more playable races being added instead of only having humans like Dragon Age 2. Now there were elves, dwarves, and for the first time, Qunari. Oh, and they added mounts too because Skyrim had them, which got as much use as they did in that game. After getting more time to make the game and applying a little extra Bioware magic to the problem, they managed to release in November 2014. To high praise from most and selling really well, though there was a cost in how buggy the game ran and still does. So just to be clear, the game doesn't run badly and the options for different settings are decent, with good difficulty options and even these things called trials if you want to challenge yourself. But there is way more jank in Inquisition than previous Bioware games, which does take me out of the experience as I play. For instance, the game was made to run at 30 FPS, but if you have the hardware you can run it at 60. Though the cutscenes are locked at 30 frames per second, and the in-game bird animations too, I think?
Something's very wrong.
This might be because Bioware was just struggling to get things working in the game, but there is other stuff too, like NPCs being in odd places and companions messing with my sanity. As I swear when running around the map sometimes and not looking at them, they'll use a health potion out of the blue. It might be because they're addicted to health potions and trying to sneak a drink when I'm not looking, or maybe it's because they're falling under the map and nearly dying as they follow me, but I have no definitive proof yet. With the context of how the game was made, I understand things were probably never going to be perfect. But on the other hand, letting things slide did lead to future problems with other Bioware games. Sometimes the game feels like it's barely keeping things together, but somehow manages to keep things going. It reflects how the game was made. I do wish it ran smoother. No, not like that. Though, in spite of all that, the game does look very nice. The visuals have seen a big improvement from previous games, as Bioware did take advantage of the one thing the Frostbite engine could do and made some beautiful open areas in the game, while sort of combining the art styles from Origins and Dragon Age 2 with a lot more detail. It's a bit hard to describe, like I want to say the game has the same hue as Origins but doesn't overuse brown so much. And the characters are stylized like in Dragon Age 2 but with way more definition. It's a nice balance. Another influence that helped Bioware to get the look for the game was Renaissance oil paintings, which worked really well to give Inquisition a more photorealistic look but still keep things stylized like past games. All this together gives the game a bit of a unique look compared to other fantasy games. It also had an effect on the different factions in Inquisition, which are more distinct from each other than in past games. You can easily tell from what a character is wearing where they're from, which combined with how past games use accents to make Thedas feel more diverse,
Come on!
makes the world feel really fleshed out. I got the sense that the artists for the games really went all out with even making these cool tarot cards for the companions and the loading screens. Though if you're playing on PC, you're probably not going to get a good look at the ones on the loading screens, as these were made for console loading times where you could look at the cool card and read a bit of the lore with them. Now I'm not complaining about the loading times being too fast on PC, as I dream of the day when they're gone completely, but I'm bringing it up because I want to highlight where the focus of the game's design was, which was leaning even more towards consoles than even Dragon Age 2 was. Like the whole UI in Inquisition feels easiest to use when playing with a controller, but when using a mouse and keyboard feels oversized and really clunky to me. It's a step backwards compared to Dragon Age 2 or even Origins, which had much cleaner and usable UIs. If they include some resizing options or at least moving the ability portraits more out the way, it could have helped a lot, I think. Talking about ability portraits, they still look like something out of a mobile game, and to me kind of clash a bit with the whole visual style Inquisition is going for. Though they are easy to read and mostly give a clear indication of what they'll do, so I'll say functionally good but not dressed for the occasion. The voice acting at least is still great and well performed like in past games.
Good! You're finally here! Now help me close this, would you?
With the entire cast bringing characters to life and matching the tone for each scene they're in very well. It's pretty hard for stories to do the whole going from serious to goofy thing that a lot of modern stories try to go for, which is especially overdone in Marvel movies. But the voice acting combined with the writing in the game does a really good job at keeping things dire while still having some great light-hearted moments. What also helps with setting the tone for the game is the music, which is some of the best in the series. The previous two games do have music I find really nostalgic and memorable. Like in Origins, when you go to the Deep Roads and that one song plays, it fills me with a bit of dread even now. The things I saw. Or if you hear Hawke's family theme from Dragon Age 2, you might have some fun memories of the Hawke estate mixed with a fairly big dose of depression after the things that happened in Kirkwall. Now, what does Inquisition do with its music? Well, it pretty much just grabs you and says, we're going on an epic adventure to change the world. And there's going to be a lot of danger. But some fun times too. It's all really good, like they even managed to have a moment in the story where it becomes a musical for one important scene. More on that later though. So before I keep going on about the music, let's get into the gameplay. This time around, Bioware went for an even more action-heavy experience, as you don't automatically attack an enemy, but now need to hold a button down to attack, and you can finally jump in a Dragon Age game. Very engaging. Okay, joking aside, the combat system's not bad, just awkward like the rest of the Dragon Age series, but in a new way. You can have some fun with it. Like, it has an interesting system where you need to move barriers or guard from an enemy before you can start reducing their health. And you'll need a mix of classes in your party to be able to handle both. You can use guard and barrier too, like I actually enjoyed playing as a tank taunting enemies, which builds guard so you can take damage for the team. There are also skills you can learn that'll help close the distance on enemies and evade them, as they're more mobile than in past games, with some teleporting to attack you while others will jump a long way to avoid you attacking them, which I found made me need to get a bit more tactical early in the game. But once you've leveled up a little bit and gotten a few early skills and spells, most encounters will start to feel samey. Talking about skills and stats, you don't get to really pick the stats you want to put points in anymore, which is kind of fine with me, because if you know how they worked in older RPGs, it was just to add points to the stats that suited your class, which was generally the same one each time you got points to assign. It also means you're less likely to make a broken build, though I could understand if some players miss being able to min-max stats for some very specialized builds. But you can get around this a bit with crafting armor with specific stats, which is a little broken in this game, as most things you craft will be better than the loot you find in the world. Chatting about broken things, the AI for your followers in combat is pretty dumb at times. They don't know how to use abilities involving jumping or avoiding damage correctly, so you need to set it up so they don't use those skills in the character menu unless you control them directly. Also, mages and archers, instead of fighting at a distance from enemies, will follow you directly into the thick of battle, which doesn't tend to end well. The way to fix this is again to go into the character menu and set them to follow themselves, which I know sounds wonky, but it works, as they tend to stay out of the middle of fights more from my experience. Other than that, the AI works mostly okay in combat, as you don't have to babysit them too often. Well, on normal difficulties, I make no promises if you set the game to harder ones. I do miss being able to set up custom commands for the AI like in Origins and Dragon Age 2, as now the commands are very limited and basic, and it's much harder to set up combos, which are still in the game but a lot less obvious. To me, they're a lot less noticeable and underwhelming in Inquisition, when compared to Dragon Age 2, which had status effects floating above the enemy. And if you got a combo off, a little animation popped in the status effect with a very nice breaking sound. Very satisfying. But in Inquisition you get a floating status text for a few seconds that then disappears, and when you pull off a combo the game goes into slow motion for a few seconds, which might make you think, oh, something wrong with my PC? No, that's just how they show you pulling off a combo. This might be a bit of a controversial opinion, but I think Dragon Age 2 did it better. Another complaint I have about the combat system is the tactical camera feels terrible now. Especially with mouse and keyboard, it's way more awkward than past games, which made me barely want to use it at all. I did use it once or twice to get an overview of some fights, but never actually used it to tactically play out fights like I would in previous games. It feels a bit better with a controller, but that's probably because the whole game was made to work with them from the start, as it does feel like the PC controls were an afterthought along with the UI options. But I guess it's probably the price Bioware had to pay to make the game work on 5 platforms, 4 of which were consoles, so it makes sense to focus on that control scheme. Though regardless of what controls you use to try and play the game tactically, it doesn't feel quite right. It's like the series has come full circle from Origins, where PC controls which were more tactical were made to work on consoles. And now in Inquisition, console controls which are more action based have been retrofitted to work on PC, and both still don't gel well together. I kinda hope this awkwardness that's been in 3 games now doesn't continue into the future, as in my opinion after all the mixed action tactical combat systems that they've tried, it's never really made the games better. Just pick one, maybe steal Final Fantasy VII Remake's battle system or something, anything, please. Anyway, what the game does well is make big story choices feel impactful, even if they really are just variations in how things will play out, and not really taking the story in a drastically different direction. The game also does a good job of making you feel like you're in charge of a powerful organization, with the game allowing you to pass judgments on enemies caught by the Inquisition, which can have some fun outcomes, or more serious ones depending on your mood that day. Another thing that adds to you feeling in charge is the war table, where you get to assign one of your advisors to deal with a problem involving the Inquisition on the big map of Southern Thedas. The outcome of these will be affected by which advisor you assign. For example, if you want to make people disappear, then just give the job to Liliana. The war table can have some interesting and fun side stories that have an impact on other events in the open world. Though, I am a bit more iffy about the time requirements on the war table, as those remind me of a cooldown timer in a mobile game.
I'm chums with the dungeon keeper.
Which made me wonder if they were thinking about turning this into an app on your phone where you could speed things up for a little extra money, as the timers are a little ridiculous at times. And let's get on to the main thing separating Inquisition from previous games, the open world areas. This is where some problems show up. Though before getting into that, I do want to say that for Bioware's first attempt at a third-person open worldish game, the map design I think isn't too bad. Areas look beautiful and on the surface interesting to explore. There's also a fair bit of variety in the types of terrain too, which is nice. They really went out of their way not to reuse areas as much as they did in Dragon Age 2. Also there are some good distinct areas and landmarks you can see from quite a distance that make you want to go there and have a closer look. I'd even go as far as to say that some bits of the map are at least a little memorable. Like if you've played Inquisition before, I'm willing to bet you know what's beyond this little cave here. Now the problem that comes with these large open maps is you have to fill them with stuff to do. Also remember, Bioware was busy for a long time just creating all the RPG tools for this game, before actually making the game. So carefully handcrafted side quests that could feed into the main story, which took time away from getting the game to run, wasn't gonna work. They needed stuff that was repeatable and easy to make. This is where those collecting shards, star puzzles, and requisition quests come in. If they were done with a lot more moderation and maybe some interesting stories added to them, then they might not have come across as obvious filler content. But here we are. Also, they add another problem the game has with open areas, which is instead of the areas feeling like they add to the overall story, most of the time the open world feels like it drags the pacing of the game's story down. Another thing adding to the problems is the way side quests are presented, some of which actually have good stories, but don't feel very impactful and give the vibe of a forgettable quest you get in an MMO or something. I think I know why this is. So you know how Bioware set itself apart from other RPG games by making its storytelling way more cinematic? Well, one of the ways it did that is by framing dialogue between NPCs and players like a scene you'd see in a TV show or movie. You know, with camera angles switching between player characters and NPCs as they talked. This made conversations more dynamic and helped get a feel for the reaction between those talking, and generally made these interactions more immersive and engaging. Now in Inquisition, Bioware still has cinematic conversations, but introduced a new conversation system called Simple Conversations, which used none of that framing. You just walked up to an NPC and started talking from the same third-person view used when walking around the world, and that's it. To me, it really takes a lot away from these conversations. It's like the game is telling me this isn't an important person you're talking to, it's just a quest giver and not like a character you should care even slightly about, which makes the quest you do for them feel a bit forgettable and a lot less impactful. Like, why should I care about this character's tragic backstory if the game is framing it as unimportant? It feels like a downgrade in storytelling from past Bioware games where even minor characters got the cinematic conversation treatment. The reason that Bioware says this system was introduced was to take less control away from the player or constrain the camera. Yeah, sure. I think the actual reason was Bioware was struggling with just getting things working in this game. And this way of doing conversations was a quick, easy way to do a lot of them without having to do the animation and camera work required for the cinematic way they usually did it. It solved that problem but helped contribute to making a lot of the side quests feel like they don't really matter to the overall story, and are just distractions from the main plot. You really feel this in the first big open area, the hinterlands, which at the start of the game feels like a huge checklist of things to do, most of which are from NPCs who feel unimportant because of how they're framed, and it just drags the start of the game down. Whenever I get the urge to do a new playthrough of Inquisition, I get a bit excited about it, but then I remember I have to go to the hinterlands again and it almost kills my urge to play the game. The way the map is laid out is also a bit directionless, like they put you in the middle of it and you have to explore outwards in all directions to do these lackluster quests. But there isn't a strong overall objective to the area, just a bunch of little side tasks that don't feel like they add up to anything. It doesn't feel like you're making progress, just going around in circles. This combined with Bioware giving players a little too much freedom in controlling when to progress the main story at the start of the game just doesn't work well, I think. Now, speaking for myself, I tend to prepare too much for upcoming big story missions. I don't know if that's the same for everyone, but by doing that you end up doing a lot of the smaller filler quests, of which there are too many of in this game. To me, this is probably why most players get fed up when going to the hinterlands, which has a reputation of being very tedious. Like, they could have started with another area called the Fallow Mire, which to me is way better paced and enjoyable to go through, and after completing it, Bioware could have said, okay, you've had some fun, but time to move on with the main story. Why I think Fallow Mire is better is it's a bit open but mostly linear in the way you go through the map. You start at the top of the map and work your way down, lighting these beacons to keep demons and undead away from the main path. It also has a good overall objective for the map as you're trying to rescue captured Inquisition soldiers. But if you want to, you can explore a bit and go either side of the main path a little to find interesting things. Also, there are no shards to collect or star puzzles on the map either, and to me generally feels better to play through because of that. So Bioware can make it work if they fill the map with less filler and give a better overall objective for the area. It does have the problem of conversations being too simple, so it lacks a bit of drama when getting to the end of it, but it's still way better than the hinterlands. I could also go on about collecting plants like elf root and metals and how Bioware overused that as a time sink, but I think you get the idea. They were throwing everything they could at this game to make it feel bigger and longer. And it doesn't make the game better, it actually takes away from what the game does well, which is replayability, as the game offers a lot of small and big choices that feel like they have a meaningful impact as you play the game. And it's not just the choices you make in this game, but past games too that can have an effect. Like, just for instance, Lagain, who is a big adversary in Origins, can show up in Inquisition as a semi-significant character in the main plot, depending on your choices in that game. Now, to get him in the game, you don't have to play Origins all over again, just go to the Dragon Age Keep website where you can put those story choices in, and load them into Inquisition to see them play out. The website even offers a nice recap of Dragon Age's story that's narrated by Brian Bloom, the voice of Varric. It's a great feature for replayability and seeing the effect of choices in past games on this one. You just have to get past Inquisition's bad pacing, which is doable if you focus on doing just enough to make progress in the main story. Which is kinda saying a lot about the game's design when the best advice I can give you about enjoying the game more is to do less stuff in it. But sometimes it's worth it to run around open areas doing filler content just to hear your companions chat with each other.
I have only one question, Sarah. Did you cut your own hair?
Yeah, why wouldn't I?
You could try using something other than a rusty butter knife.
Oh, excuse me while I dig up my diamond-studded hair-cutting whatevers.
Scissors. The word you're looking for is scissors.
Companions in this game are all pretty great and at least interesting in their own way. Like, I'm sure there are some divisive companions among fans in Inquisition, but for me there wasn't anyone as abrasive as Carver this time around. Some are a bit weird and out there, but they do make for interesting interactions as you play through the game. Okay, so you remember Cassandra from Dragon Age 2, the intimidating lady who was gently questioning Varric to find out more about Hawke? She was working for Justinia the Divine of the Chantry, who's kinda like the Pope in this setting. Cassandra's job was to find Hawke and help fix the whole Mage Rebellion thing that got started in Dragon Age 2. She gets to be part of the main cast this time around. And being the former right hand of the Divine, she's fairly religious, while being pretty aggressive and has a noble background, as you can tell from the amount of names she has.
Seeker, Cassandra, Allegra, Portia, Calogera, Philomena.
Get on with it.
Pentagast.
As you can tell, she's the sort of person who likes to get things done, especially if it helps restore order. Though she is kind-hearted and willing to listen once you get to know her a little. Also, she's a bit of a dweeb, but we'll get into that later. Another returning character from Dragon Age 2 is Varric, who's still sort of in Cassandra's custody at the start of the game. Though after the big scary hole in the sky formed, he could have left, but being the roguish dwarf with a tendency to help those in need, he stayed. He's still very much the same as he was in Dragon Age 2, being easy to like while being sly and still writing books. Now, because both him and Cassandra were in the last game, they have some history, with Varric very much not liking being a captive and the tough questioning about his friend Hawke. So you have this very fun dynamic of Varric holding a grudge against Cassandra for that, and you're getting the sense that she feels a little bad about what happened and is now wanting to awkwardly make friends with him. It goes about as well as you imagine.
How do you write as you do, Varric? I can never find the proper words.
You? Right? Really?
I've needed to describe events in reports. They always come off as...
Dry, boring, lifeless, stale.
You are an ass.
Just helping you find those words.
They do sort of become friends over time, but there's always a slight bit of a grudge Varric holds onto.
I spy.
No.
But...
No.
Well, you should be good at finding things. Of course, you couldn't find Hawke.
At least they both share an interest in books.
Have you been taking notes on all this, Varric?
Well, you'll need to be more specific there, Seeker.
The Inquisition. You're not planning to write a book about us, are you?
Oh, don't get your hopes up. You're not that interesting a subject.
I am. Feel free to write a book about me.
And call it what? The Wayward Magister?
I'm not a magister. Oh, forget it. You just get it wrong.
Speaking about Dorian, he's a mage from Tevinter and probably one of the best companions in the game, just for the entertaining witty banter he brings to conversations. He can be a little arrogant and prideful about his homeland of Tevinter, but he does see its faults, as it has been known to go a little extreme in the whole blood magic thing.
Let their blood rain from the sky!
Though also being from there, you can learn more about what his home is actually like instead of the silly rumors that come from past games.
Ah, yes. Everyone outside the Imperium always seems quite fascinated by it. Probably why they come up with so many ridiculous tales. Flying cows over Minrathous. That's madness. All right, that one's actually true, but the cows didn't have wings.
Another magic user that will join you is Solus, who is an elf apostate mage who knows a lot about the Fade. He's pretty much a big nerd about it actually, and will give you approval for just talking to him about it, or anything really. He's also very into elf history too on top of that. Now he might come across as a little boring, but ladies, if you choose to romance him, I promise you he's a heartbreaker.
Aldathanas Elgara Masula Eva Venan. Excuse me?
Excuse yourself. Whatever you said and what I did, same difference to me.
He's not the only elf that can join you too. Sarah is a bit of the opposite of Solus, as she's not really into elf stuff. Her view on things is simpler and more forceful. She is a little different in how she explains things too, but you can kinda understand she wants to help those who get pushed around in society. Also, she's mischievous and into doing pranks.
You! Oh, frig. You did it.
Then there's Ironballer Merc, who, when you first meet, tells you he's a spy for the Qunari right off the bat. Either he's the worst spy ever, or so many moves ahead he knows you'll find out and decides to skip that character arc in the story. He's fairly upfront about things and good in a fight. I recommend bringing him when you fight dragons. Also, he has the same voice actor as James from Mass Effect 3. They even have similar little side stories of the player meeting rank and file soldiers. Bioware copying past homework and pretending it's new on that one. Anyway, another character who looks like they have horns but is just wearing a fancy hat is Vivienne. She's a very posh mage who's in charge of what's left of the mage circles that didn't rebel. And with that you can tell she's not a fan of changing things up in Thedas. She's more about keeping up appearances and playing politics with a bit of style. Also not a fan of spirits. Speaking of which, you can recruit a slightly odd rogue who may or may not be one named Cole. He's like a ghost but not quite. He's a bit strange, but you get the sense he's trying to help, though his methods aren't always clear in what he's trying to do. Last on the list of companions is Blackwall. He's basically the most stereotypical Grey Warden you can imagine, maybe even more than Duncan from Origins. He likes killing Darkspawn and helping those in need. Though like all Grey Wardens, he has a bit of a dark past that he keeps fenced in, almost like some kind of black wall. Moving on. On top of getting a lot of companions, you also get 3 advisors to help you run the Inquisition, some of which are returning characters from previous games. Like Liliana, who you might remember from Origins. She was the left hand of the Divine and will act as your spy master in the game. She's good at finding things out and somehow even scarier than she was in Origins. Another returning cast member is Cullen, who you might remember as the slightly demon-tortured Templar from Origins.
Omega.
We must hurry.
And later in Dragon Age 2, the level-headed second in command to Meredith, the craziest Templar in Kirkwall. He's going to be commanding the Inquisition's forces and your tactical advisor. As you can probably assume, he's got some heavy stories he can chat to you about. The final advisor is Josephine, a very capable ambassador that's good at organizing and maybe a bit of a workaholic. She serves as your diplomatic advisor and will help keep things from turning into international incidents when she can. But back to companions. So Bioware tried in Dragon Age 2 to experiment with a different kind of approval system for them, which had mixed results for fans. I kinda liked it, but apparently the friendship rival system was confusing for some. So for this game, Bioware switched back to an easier to understand approve-disapprove system, but with some improvements like hiding the approval bar so you have to guess a little if they approve of you or not. And instead of showing the exact amount of if they approve or disapprove of a choice or action, you get shown a vague text which ranges from slightly to greatly. Also, instead of just reaching a certain approval level for new interactions, certain story events will trigger them too. This works rather well as it makes interacting with companions feel less gamey and a bit more natural. Like you're not trying to fill a bar to activate more companion quests, just getting to know them if you want to. The game also offers other ways to improve companion relationships by giving you small side quests in the open world that you can do to gain some approval, which feels better than just throwing gifts at them until they like you. Also, when you make a big choice, you don't have to worry about who's in your current party, as all your companions will take note of your actions. I like this system the most out of the Dragon Age games I've played. It lets you bring who you want on missions, without making me miss out on advancing companion side stories, which are some of the best bits in the game. It also shows that sometimes less is more, which I wish was applied to other aspects of the game. Okay, before I get sidetracked about that again, let's get into the story. The story kicks off with a bang, and you finding yourself in the Fade, which is Dragon Age's version of the Warp from 40k. So basically it's a place that has all the magic, demons and dream stuff going on. A very dangerous place. People can't usually get into the Fade as it's cut off from the physical world by this barrier called the Veil, so it's really weird that you're here, but you don't have time to wonder what's going on, because some spider demon things start chasing you, but you find a glowing woman that seems to want to help. And just as you're about to reach her, you get transported back to the real world, where you pass out and get hit by not one, but 2 RPG tropes, as you're now a prisoner and have amnesia about recent important events. Waking up in chains, you realize your hand has a really weird magic mark on it. And in a bit of a repeat from Dragon Age 2, you get interrogated by Cassandra, though this time Liliana's around to play good cop to Cassandra's bad cop. She seems really eager to kill you.
Tell me why we shouldn't kill you now.
Maybe with good reason. As it turns out, you're the only survivor of a massive explosion that killed everyone at peace negotiations between the Mages and Templars, who if you remember at the end of Dragon Age 2 were at all-out war with each other. In addition to that, the Divine Justinia who was leading the peace negotiations is also dead. And just to make things really bad, these scary rifts have opened up everywhere, including a massive rift called the Breach, which is growing in the sky with demons raining out of it. That has magic that reacts to the mark on your hand, and if it keeps growing, could swallow the whole world. To say you look guilty is a bit of an understatement. You've pretty much become the most hated person in the world in record time. Though the mark on your hand might be able to undo the demon rift thing in the sky. So Cassandra takes you up the mountain towards it, where a lot of very fortunate things happen. On the way up you meet Varric, who can relate to your situation a little and just wants to help. You also meet Solus, who knows a lot about the Fade. He tells you these rifts are tears in the veil that separate the Fade from Thedas, which is convenient as he helps you figure out how to close the smaller rifts with the mark on your hand. Going up the mountain you discover Red Lyrium, which is probably not a good sign. and ground zero for the big rift in the sky. There's also a very plot convenient echo of a memory that showed what actually happened. So it turns out the shadowy bad guy wanted to sacrifice the divine for some ritual involving an orb, and you walked in on it and tried to save the divine. Good job, turns out you didn't want to single-handedly destroy the world. You just did it by accident. With your name cleared, all you need to do now is close the giant hole in the sky, which involves you fighting a big demon while nearly dying in the process of almost closing the giant breach. Wake up, you find instead of everyone hating you, they now think you're amazing, and have given you the religious title of Herald of Andraste, because of a misunderstanding of what actually happened on the mountain. Now after all that has happened, you might be wondering, do I get a dog again? No. Why? Well, because Bioware is mean. They even say so themselves.
So why is the Mabari not an available companion or just a summon?
Because we're mean.
Also maybe technical problems, blah blah blah. Though there is a dog shopkeeper in the game, so I guess I can forgive Bioware this time, and hold off in sending passive-aggressive Mabari cupcakes that taste of despair. Back to the story. With the big rift in the sky still a bit open and the shock of a major religious leader's death, the world is in a bit of a chaotic mess, with no one taking charge of the situation. But Cassandra has a plan, as she enacts the final orders of the Divine, which is to reform the Inquisition of old and sort out this mess. Since your hand is really useful at doing that, you get conscripted into the Inquisition as an agent, with your first task being helping setting up the Inquisition, and finding out what's happening with the mages and Templars who are still going at each other after the failed peace talks. Also, this is round about the time you'll meet most of your companions and choose whether or not to bring them into the Inquisition, and get stuck wandering the hinterlands forever. It's an okay start before the hinterlands, with the main plot dramatically kicking in straight away, which there's nothing wrong with, but it does sacrifice establishing any backstory for your character. Like there was more of an introduction to Hawk in Dragon Age 2, and that itself was a bit of a rush start when compared to Origins, which had a lengthy intro depending on your race and class choices at the beginning of the game.
Good evening, my lord.
I kinda miss that. I mean, the game does give quests from the war table which relate to your past, and the occasional NPC mentioning your race and class choice, which I appreciate, though you do feel like someone who was just thrown into the world recently, like an isekai story or something. But back to the mage and Templar problem. The Templars are punching nuns in the street and not listening to anyone so they can keep killing mages. And the mages have asked for help from a Tevinter Imperium cult in exchange for protection, which I mean of all people to accept help from, maybe not the smartest choice?
Let their blood rain from the sky!
While all this is going on, it does seem that same shadowy figure who tried to sacrifice a divine is manipulating both the Templars and mages for his own ends. But you don't really have time for that, as the breach in the sky is still a big problem and you need to seal it completely before doing anything else. This is where your first big choice in the game comes, as you need a lot of magical power to help seal the breach. And either the Templars or mages can help you with that, but you can only pick one. The consequences of this choice will have an influence on what type of bad guys you'll fight for the rest of the game. Each choice is interesting, but I feel like the mage one got a bit more attention from Bioware's writers. Here's a little overview of both. If you pick the Templars, you find out that a significant number of Templar officers have been taking red lyrium, under orders from a demon who's pretending to be their leader, which has been corrupting them into monsters, and you need to stop them from forcing the rest of the Templars into the same path, while the demon tries to take over your mind. Fun times. This quest shows how far the Templars have gone with their obsession with stopping mages at all costs, because if you remember red lyrium from Dragon Age 2, you know it's really dangerous stuff, though the mages aren't doing much better. Because if you decide instead to help the mages get free of the Tevinter cult, the magister in charge of the cultists, when cornered, uses very rare and powerful time magic to send you into the future, where you get a taste of what will happen if you fail to close the breach, which is good motivation. As things are pretty bad in the future with demon armies running around, and the hole in the sky is now the whole sky. More problems include your companions in the future, as they have been corrupted by red lyrium and aren't doing so hot. Also, you get to see Liliana, who's had a really tough time while you were gone, be a total badass when trying to help you escape. It's not often you get to see bad endings play out in stories like this, as I think most players try to do their best to avoid negative outcomes in these type of games. So to me, it's a really interesting way of showing the stakes you're playing for, even if it is a little convenient for Dragon Age to suddenly have time travel magic. Though they do explain it in the story as only being possible because of the breach. Like, I have no problem with haste or slow spells, but full-on time travel can add a lot of problems to stories. So hopefully this is a rare occurrence going forward. Back to current events though, with either of those quests done, you get the help you need to finally close the breach, and celebrate a well-earned victory for the Inquisition. So happy ending, right? Nope. Remember, there's still that shady bad guy who started all of this, and now you've kind of messed up his plans with either the mages or Templars. So he's coming for you, with an army. Okay, that should be enough if you're interested in playing the game for yourself, so if you don't want spoilers, then skip to here. Well, those guys are in for a bit of a surprise, because it turns out the big bad is another returning character from Dragon Age 2, Corypheus, who I should explain a bit about who he is and why it's a surprise seeing him here. So Cory is an ancient Darkspawn who was caged in a very old elaborate magic prison by the Grey Wardens, which is really odd considering all Grey Wardens tend to kill all Darkspawn they come into contact with. I mean, it's kind of their whole thing. The reason he appears in Dragon Age 2 is because Hawk's dad long ago used blood magic to reinforce the failing prison's magic with the help of some Grey Wardens. But Cory was powerful enough to manipulate a group of dwarves out outside his cage into luring Hawk to the prison, since Hawk's blood could be used to undo the magic that their father did to the prison.
And really? More blood? Why can't it ever be spit or a lock of hair?
You really want to encounter a spit mage?
For variety, sure.
Hawk releases Corey and has an epic battle where they kill him, but obviously not well enough, because here he is and he isn't messing around, as even though you managed to bring down a mountain of snow and part of his army, he sends a freaking dragon to wipe out the Inquisition, and it's not an average one either, as this dragon might be an archdemon. So with overwhelming force being sent against you, it might be time to retreat. Now there is a secret passage the Inquisition could use to get away, but there's a catch. There's always a catch. In order to give the Inquisition's people time to escape, someone needs to be a distraction for Corey and the dragon. And he is specifically after you for messing with his plans, so you're the perfect choice whether you want to be or not. So you go out and buy time for the Inquisition to make a run for it. In the battle you start to make progress against the enemy, then Corey has enough of you stealing the show and makes his own dramatic entrance. This is when you get a monologue about what's going on. Basically, you learn that the mark on your hand can be used to open a way into the Fade. And when you tried to say the Divine, you accidentally took that power from the orb he was using as part of his plan to make himself into a god. He does try to take the power back, but it's kinda stuck to you now. So a bit conveniently he gets annoyed and throws you onto a catapult facing the mountain. And the retreating Inquisition sends a signal that they're all clear. This gives you a chance to be a little smug while doing the avalanche trick again.
Enjoy your victory. Here's your prize.
Now this should kill you as you don't have a dragon to carry away like Corey does, but luckily there's an abandoned mineshaft you can jump down to safety. Waking up a little later you make your way through a cave and into a blizzard where you find hints of which way the Inquisition went, and eventually find them. But things aren't going great, as even though the Inquisition survived, it did lose a big battle and its home base, which is a major hit to everyone's morale and causing open arguments in the Inquisition's leadership. So obviously the only way to fix this is with an uplifting musical number. I'm not joking either, as the entire Inquisition just bursts into song. On paper this scene should not work at all, but the great music and well-staged cinematics does a great job of making it feel very hopeful and an important moment in the story. I mean, it was good enough to make me not think about the fact that hundreds of people singing in the mountains might attract the attention of an army that's after them. Anyway, with the singing done, Solus has a chat about the orb that Corey has, which he tells you is an elven artifact. No need to worry how he knows that, as he gives you advice to lead the Inquisition north with epic music to an abandoned castle called Skyhold. Again, don't question how he knows that, just go with it. Come on, it's a free castle. So Skyhold is a pretty great new home base for the Inquisition, but there's an issue with it for me story-wise. You see, with the game putting so much attention to it and how you build it up during the rest of the game, it sets up a Chekhov's gun where you're expecting Corey to attack with an army again, but this time you'll have a chance to prepare, and see all the effort you put into fixing Skyhold over the course of the game pay off. Kinda like in Mass Effect 2 when you do all the upgrades to the Normandy before the suicide mission, which made the ending very satisfying in that game, as you get to see all the upgrades pay off.
How do you like that, you sons of bitches?
But Chekhov's castle never gets used for anything like that, which to me is very disappointing. I'm fairly sure Bioware was building it up to play a role in the endgame, but probably because of the rough development they had to wrap things up without it. Though I'm getting ahead of myself. So after arriving at Skyhold, the advisors and Cassandra pull in Alistair.
What do you want to hear? That I prefer to follow? I do.
You sound so very defensive.
Couldn't you crawl into a bush somewhere and die?
And instead of any of them taking charge, they put you in as the leader of the Inquisition. The first thing they bring up on your to-do list is to find out who Corey is and what he's doing. And Varric knows someone who can help.
I know one thing. If Varric has brought who I think he has, Cassandra is going to kill him.
Yeah, it's Hawk. Remember, the whole reason Cassandra was questioning Varric in Dragon Age 2 was to find Hawk. So Varric knowing this whole time where Hawk was and not telling Cassandra causes her to lose it and want to beat the shit out of him. Is this what it's like to watch one of those overly dramatic reality TV shows? I think I understand the appeal now. Though you should probably break up the fight before she actually kills Varric. We'll come back to these two later. But first, what does Hawk have to say? Well, they tell you about their history with Corey and that the Grey Wardens might know more about him, though the Wardens have been acting a bit weird lately, and that you should look into that. Investigating further, you eventually find out that Corey is immortal, and that he has the ability to influence the mind of Grey Wardens, which explains the magic prison he was in. Also, since Corey got out, all the Wardens have been hearing the calling, which is when their ability to sense Darkspawn becomes a liability, as they slowly start to die because of the Darkspawn blood they drank during their joining ritual. It only normally happens to a few Wardens at a time, and they usually do the self-sacrifice thing before it gets too bad. But with it happening to all the wardens at once, it's absolutely terrifying to them, as if they all die then there's no one left to stop the next blight. And when people get really scared, they tend to do stupid things, like come up with a plan to use blood magic and a demon army to go into the deep roads and kill the last 2 old gods, before they become archdemons. This plan was suggested to them by a Tevinter mage, of course. Staying on brand at least, so obviously Corey is tricking the wardens into doing this so he can get a free demon army. And he has too strong an influence on them for you to just casually ask them to stop with the whole crazy demon plan. This leads to a huge battle between your Inquisition forces and the Grey Wardens to stop them from creating a demon army. Now it might be a bit of a convoluted reason to have the Inquisition fight the Grey Wardens, but it is compelling, as the Wardens in past Dragon Age games have always been seen as the heroes who would do anything to stop the Darkspawn from destroying the world. Now we get to see how far they'd actually go to do that, and how that desire to do good has been twisted by fear into something that could do a huge amount of damage to Thedas. It's a good bit of storytelling, I think. But once you made the Grey Wardens see reason, you get to decide their fate, by either banishing them or recruiting them to help the Inquisition. Bit of a tough choice as they are good in a fight, but they can be easily influenced by Corey. Anyway, with that done, let's get to the real drama of the story. What's happening with Varric and Cassandra? Well, if you manage to get enough approval with Cassandra, you can trigger, in my opinion, one of the best side quests in the game, where it's revealed that Cassandra's into smutty romance novels. And not only that, she's a huge fan of Varric's smutty romance novels, Swords and Shields. It's too perfect. She gets so caught up in telling you about it, this happens.
And this one ends in a cliffhanger. I know Varric is working on the next. He must be. You could ask him to finish it. Command him to... Pretend you don't know this about me.
Amazing. I'm not going to spoil the rest of the quest, but go talk to Varric for a fun conclusion to it. Back to the main story, where your advisors discuss information about Corey's plan to kill the Empress of Valais, to throw the south of Thedas into chaos. And since this is all legions we're talking about, you can't just inform them in a common letter. No, something more formal is required. Also, maybe there's a civil war going on too, preventing your warning from getting through. So you need to attend an elaborate ball that's being held to start peace talks that can hopefully end the civil war. Also, the plot to kill the Empress is happening at this ball. The quest is a nice change of pace from constant fighting. Just maybe keep an eye on Cullen. The ladies of the court are like piranhas around him.
Did you just grab my bottom?
I couldn't help myself.
As you go through the quest, you'll get involved with court intrigue and having to keep up appearances. It's a fun experience if you enjoy the Game of Thrones type of scheming and betrayals. Oh, and the secrets you can find out are fairly scandalous. There are also a good amount of variations on what the overall outcome will be, which makes taking different choices interesting. Though the most interesting thing that will happen at the ball is you meeting Morrigan, who's been up to a few things since Origins, where she got away from her mom Flemeth. Right now she's hanging out as an advisor to the Empress of Valais. Also, she may have a child with an old god soul in it, but that'll take too long to explain. Anyway, with Orlais sorted and now on the Inquisition side, Morrigan joins you as a liaison from Orlais and acts as a kind of ancient elf history advisor, showing you things about Illuvians, which are mirrors that the ancient elves use to travel vast distances, and how Corypheus might use them to somehow get into the Fade, which would be very bad. This is when you find out Corey and his large army of followers are now searching ancient elf ruins in the Arbor Wilds. So apparently now's the time for the Inquisition to call in all his favors and forces to try and finish off Corey and his army. It's built up as a huge, almost final battle, but to me it felt like another chapter in the fight against the bad guys. Like after this there would be at least one last big fight or clashing of armies or something. But after this, Corey doesn't have an army anymore, so it feels a little underwhelming to me. Like, don't get me wrong, going through the jungle and helping the Inquisition forces and allies fighting Corey's minions is great. It's just the story's pacing starts to feel a bit off from here. Though, back to why we're in the jungle. So Corey's found an ancient elf temple of Mythal, which is protected by these recently reawakened ancient elves. And he's not often an Luvian, but something called the Well of Sorrows, which our ancient elf expert knows nothing about and gets some flack for later.
You said Corypheus wanted an Illuvian, but he mentioned a Well of Sorrows. Which is right?
I am uncertain of what he referred to.
You're not certain? You said you knew what he was looking for.
Confidence can carry one only so far, it seems.
I suspected. I did not know. Yes, I was wrong. Does that please you?
Oh, how the mighty have crumbled.
Also, while Corey is forcing his way past the magical ward protecting the temple, you find out how his immortality works. Because he's an ancient darkspawn, he has a similar ability to an archdemon, which can transfer their essence to anything with the taint. But unlike archdemons, he can do this to Grey Wardens, so after bringing down the ward, he just takes over the body of a nearby Grey Warden. If you paid attention in Dragon Age 2, you could see him do this when he died in that game.
My gratitude you have for my freedom.
It's a cool bit of foreshadowing playing off between the games, but there's more payoffs to come. Back to the temple though and the race to get to the Well of Sorrows before Corey does. On the way you find out the Well of Sorrows is a magical pool of all the collective knowledge of ancient elves who serve the elf god of Mythal, and by drinking it you can gain that knowledge. But there's a bit of a catch. If you drink from it, you can be controlled by the elf god Mythal. Morrigan, who's thirsty for knowledge, doesn't care about the risks and suggests she should drink from it instead of you, which should prevent Corey's minions from getting it. It doesn't really matter which one of you drinks from it, as the outcome is mostly the same in this game, though I make no promises for future games. But having Morrigan drink from it has what I think is a fun side benefit, which I'll explain in a bit. Beating Corypheus to the well does make him really angry, and you don't have a way to stop him since he's still immortal. Though luckily there's an illuvian that works only for people who drank from the well, which you can use to escape back to Skyhold. This is when you find out most of Corey's forces were wiped out in the Arbor Wilds, and that it's just him and his dragon left. And he's probably not going to hide, but somehow attack you. So you need a way to beat that immortality of his, which since you now have access to the knowledge of the Well of Sorrows, you can. It turns out that dragon that Corey has isn't really an archdemon, but a dragon infused with his essence, which if you manage to kill will temporarily disrupt his ability to jump to a new body, so you can kill him. Though before we jump into the final battle, there's something else to deal with as Flemeth pays a visit to you. Okay, so just a quick recap of what's going on between Morrigan and Flemeth. Morrigan has had a beef with Flemeth since Origin and has been avoiding her like the plague ever since then, out of fear she might harm her and her son. And she played an excellent round of hide and seek up until now, but why did Flemeth find her? Well, it turns out Flemeth is Mythal, or what's left of her. And remember, whoever drank from the well is now bound to her forever. Which freaks out Morrigan and allows Flemeth to play some mind games with her. See, fun side benefit. Flemeth though isn't here for sinister reasons, she's actually here to help. And maybe pick up an old god soul from Morrigan's son, if you have one of those in your playthrough. Don't worry about that though, it's not important now, maybe in future games. Back to why she's here. The help Flemeth offers is either Morrigan learns how to shapeshift into a dragon if she drank from the well, or if the Inquisitor drank from it, they can summon a dragon to fight for them. So now you're set for the final battle with Corypheus and his dragon, which for me was a bit anticlimactic, as Corey just tries to open the breach again and you have to go fight him in the valley below it. It feels like you skip any build up to the fight and just get thrown into the final encounter, where Corey lifts a castle into the sky for the final fight, which is maybe a little over the top. I mean, if he could do that, then why didn't he just do it to Skyhold and then drop it back on top of the Inquisition? This level also gives the vibe that it was repurposed at the last second because everything feels like it belongs at a castle, kind of like Skyhold, but isn't. Anyway, I will admit however the music is epic at least. I mean, it makes climbing the stairs feel like you're assaulting Mount Doom or something. Oh, and finally beating that dragon is a nice bit of payback for early in the story, but the game wraps up fairly quickly after that. You manage to take the orb from Corey and use it to close the breach for one final time, and use a little bit of leftover power to finish him off. Hopefully for good. After the battle, Solus seems quite upset that the orb is broken and says it wasn't supposed to happen this way. But before you can ask more, you get distracted and he disappears. That's odd. You make it back to Skyhold to celebrate the final battle and have a party where you get to have a last chat with companions. Then the credits roll, but that's not the end, as you get a post-credit scene where it's revealed that Solus was actually the Dread Wolf, an elven god just like Mythal, and that he tried to trick Corey into opening his power orb thingy but failed and now has to complete his plan another way. Also, somehow Mythal/Flemeth is involved too? Like what? So to say a lot of people had strong feelings about Solus after this reveal is an understatement. I mean, he lied to you the whole game and he was the guy that caused the problem in the first place. Oh, and some players romanced him too. Oof. Also, why is it always mage companions at the end or near the end of Dragon Age games that drop major plot bombs? First was Morrigan with the dark ritual old god thing, then Anna's blowing stuff up at the end of Dragon Age 2 causing a major rebellion, and now Solus was the bad guy all along in Inquisition. Next game I'm watching any mages in my party like a hawk. Though that's not the entire ending, as there's more in the Trespasser DLC, which I'll get into in a bit, but I want to mention the other two DLCs quickly first. Jaws of Akron is just more the base game with a big open area for you to do some quests in. I will say it feels better than most of the other open areas in the game. The quests in it work well with the overall main story of the area too. Though again, side quests do suffer from the same problems as others in the rest of the game. They don't feel as impactful as they could because of the overuse of simple conversations, and the area does feel like a bit of a long checklist of things to do at times, but overall not too bad. It has some good lore in it about the past Inquisitor and his exploits that will reshape some of the history of Thedas. Also, you can judge a clan bear for the crime of allowing itself to be captured by a rival clan instead of fighting to the death, which is silly, but they take it seriously, so I gave the harshest punishment I could think of for a bear.
Strawvacker, I demand an unflattering report of your performance as a hold beast. It will be recited to you every day for 1 week. I trust this is sufficient embarrassment?
Ugh. I'd suggest doing the DLC just before or after the Ball and Orlais. The other DLC, The Descent, is where you go into the deep roads and fight Darkspawn. I'd suggest doing this one near the end of a playthrough as the combat is much tougher than the rest of the game. Like the first Ogier fight in it felt tougher to me than most dragons in the game. It might be because it has immunity to nearly every status effect in the game though. but I actually think it's good that it's harder, as it makes Deep Roads as scary as past games. I mean, you are basically venturing into the underground parking version of Mordor. It should be terrifying. I enjoyed this DLC more than the Jaws of Hakon. The level design to me is also better for the story, as it has some biggish areas that are linear, which keeps the pace of the story going well. You get the sense Bioware feels more comfortable telling stories with these kinds of levels, as they are very similar to past games. Speaking of which, the story is also very interesting as you find out where Lyrium comes from, and meet some interesting characters that might come back in future games. The only thing that disappointed me was they got David Hayter, who voices Snake from the Metal Gear games, to voice a dwarf companion in the DLC. He does a great performance, but Bioware dropped the ball on this one, as they have a puzzle mechanic in the DLC that uses literal Metal Gears and didn't use Mr. Hayter for a single pun, remark, or funny reference.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
I was waiting for him every time I completed one of these puzzles for him to say something, but nothing. Maybe I missed it somewhere. Really? Nothing? Don't have anything to add? And don't tell me Bioware's above writing silly remarks. I have evidence they love to write them.
Anyone need a hand?
Well, at least they include the Nug King in the DLC. Moving on to the final DLC, Trespasser. So apart from the Inquisitor losing the ability to clap, a lot happens in this DLC. It's a bit like a very extended epilogue for the main story of the game and setting up stuff for the future. It's set 2 years after beating Corey, where an exalted council is called to decide the future of the Inquisition, as you did acquire enough power to rival a nation, which makes actual other nations a little worried what you'll do with it, so you need to justify why the Inquisition should continue to exist. It also offers up a chance to catch up with companions and to go on one last big adventure together, where you need to stop a plot that could trigger a Cunari invasion that will probably start a war, which the last time the Cunari invaded was like Thedas' version of World War I, so no big deal. For the Inquisition, that's a slightly busy Tuesday. Oh, and you find out the Inquisition has been infiltrated by agents of Fain Morel, aka the Dreadwolf, and the Cunari, which does make for a good argument to disband the Inquisition. In addition, your magic hand is going a little crazy and might kill you. Okay, so more serious than a Tuesday. There's more though. You also find out significant details about ancient elf history, like the elf gods were actually just really powerful mages, and they like to enslave other elves, which means Tevinter was just keeping the tradition alive. Ooh, that's not even the biggest stuff, as you find out Solus, aka the Dreadwolf, fought against the elf gods and one day they went a little too far by killing Mathal. So to defeat the elf gods who had gone a bit power mad, he created the Veil, which separated the Fade from Thedas. This banished the elven gods, but also made life worse for elves, as they lost their very long lifespans and are now treated as second-rate citizens in most of Thedas. Solus wants to fix this by restoring the world to the way it was, which means destroying the Veil, though this might kill everyone on Thedas. His first attempt to do this was to trick Corey into using the orb to destroy the Veil, as when Solus woke after being asleep for a very long time, he wasn't powerful enough to use it himself. You saw how that turned out. So he's working on plan B now, and he's willing to do anything to get it done. Though he is nice enough to do something about your hand problem, whether you're friends with him or not, and he lets you go. After all that, you head back to the Exalted Council and get to decide the fate of the Inquisition, after which you get a cutscene showing the Inquisitor, Cassandra and Liliana deciding on their next move to take on the Dreadwolf, which seems to be heading towards Tevinter. It's a nice cliffhanger to end on while giving a good conclusion to the Inquisition story. You can maybe see after such a long time why fans of the series are so eager to see what happens next. Dragon Age Inquisition has a great main story and some of the best characters and companions in the series, with lore you can get lost in and visuals that still look really good even now. But it's held back by being bigger than it needs to be in some places, which doesn't improve the game enough to justify having them included, and actually holds players back from getting to the fun bits of the game. Also, the technical problems, while not game breaking, do add up to lessen how good the game should feel to play, as the compromise to use simple conversations with just the persistent bits of jank really do take you out of getting immersed in the world. I would still recommend playing it though, the good points generally outweigh the bad. It is an overall improvement from Dragon Age 2, where decisions played out at a much smaller scale and lacks some diversity in levels. Inquisition, even with its problems, does have some good replayability, and it does make you feel as though your choices matter and have an impact in the end. It is a good game. After this release though, Bioware did have some problem games. Hopefully after the mistakes that were made in those, they've learnt their lesson and can make a comeback. Without any Bioware magic, just take your time, please. As I do miss looking forward to playing new Bioware games like I used to. And I will admit the new stuff they've been showing for Dragon Age has me interested, but I've learned to wait and see from past experiences. So I'm doing something a little different for the end of the video, as it is near the end of the year, and I just wanted to say thank you all for checking out my videos this year, as I got more views than I expected, and hopefully I can keep getting better at making the videos. It is really nice seeing you all enjoy them. Though I will be taking a break for the holidays just to recover from this year, but as it has been a little rough. But I should be back sometime at the start of next year. So until then, happy holidays and thank you for watching. See you next time.
He put me in the book! the shit out of this!